If one day you suddenly became even smaller than your own pet, then how do you think they would treat you? The man before us became smaller and smaller because of a strange accident, until one day, his mouse-like size finally caught the cat's attention. The strong scent of blood quickly made the cat drool with desire. The man realized that he could no longer ask the cat those clever questions the way he used to, so he casually picked up a sewing needle to defend himself. But this tiny threat meant almost nothing in the eyes of the cat. And so, a tense and thrilling cat and mouse chase officially began. Today's story is the latest French sci-fi thriller released in 2026, The Shrinking Man. Although this film wears the outer shell of science fiction, what it truly explores is the core of human existentialism. So without further delay, the story begins. The male lead is named Kerry. He was originally the owner of an ordinary shipyard, successful in his career and blessed with a happy family. In his daily life, Kerry's greatest hobby was swimming freely in the familiar waters near his home. However, not long after he started swimming that day, he suddenly felt a strange discomfort spreading through his body. When he subconsciously looked up, he saw an extremely bizarre scene. Fortunately, the discomfort came quickly and disappeared just as quickly, and Kerry did not think much of it, because the shipyard had recently taken on a massive order, and the goods had to be delivered before the agreed deadline. So Kerry came to inspect the shipyard every day, urging the workers to speed up their production. After finishing work, Kerry would return to his seaside home. It was a private villa that he had spent a fortune building, and at this time every day, his wife and daughter would wait for his return as usual. Although Kerry was responsible for earning money and handling the daily meals of the family, as long as he saw the happy faces of his wife and daughter, he felt completely satisfied. But he never expected that what would happen next would completely shatter his peaceful life. First, 1 week later, Kerry discovered that the clothes he usually wore had suddenly become noticeably loose. He thought he had simply lost some weight, but after a doctor examined him, it turned out that not only had he become thinner, his height had also decreased by 4 centimeters.
Mais non, c'est pas possible, j'ai jamais fait 1m76. Depuis le service militaire, je fais 1m80. J'ai toujours fait 1m80.
Ça fait combien de temps que tu t'étais pas mesuré?
Je sais pas, 15 ans peut-être.
Because he had not measured his height for more than 10 years, the doctor said that for someone of his age, a little shrinkage was perfectly normal. Although it felt somewhat strange, Kerry did not take it too seriously. He continued to go to the shipyard every day, supervising and guiding the workers, until the 20th day after the strange discomfort first appeared. Kerry suddenly discovered a serious problem while taking a shower. The shower head that had never seemed particularly high before now looked unusually tall, and even his wedding ring suddenly slipped off his finger onto the floor. Even more strangely, although he used to be taller than his wife, he was now half a head shorter than her. At this point, anyone could tell that something was seriously wrong. Very quickly, Kerry went to the hospital for a full medical examination, but strangely enough, all the test results were completely normal, except that his height and weight had shrunk again to 1 meter 65 and 75 kilograms. As for this situation, the doctor could not provide any explanation, because from a medical perspective, even when people grow older and their bodies shrink slightly, it would never be as extreme as Kerry's case. The doctor's suggestion was for Kerry to stay in the hospital for further examinations. However, that very night, Kerry had a nightmare. He dreamed that he had become extremely small, and that he was being treated as a laboratory mouse for experiments. So after waking up in shock, he immediately fled the hospital. From that moment on, Kerry stayed at home and did not dare to go anywhere, until his body eventually became as small as that of a baby. Although his wife was deeply shocked by what was happening, the changes in their household life left her with no time to process it. Ever since Kerry became smaller, he stayed at home all day, and the order at the shipyard ultimately failed to be delivered on time, resulting in a heavy penalty for breaking the contract. The family's finances were severely affected as a result. During this period of time, it was his wife, who had always taken care of their daughter, who now had to run around everywhere dealing with the situation. But the pressure of life still weighed on her so heavily that she could barely breathe, especially when she watched Kerry gradually lose all his spirit and motivation. she felt even more helpless. One day, while Carrie sat by the window staring outside in frustration, a group of strangers suddenly followed his wife into the house. It turned out that in order to deal with their urgent financial problems, his wife had decided to sell the home that Carrie had poured so much effort and heart into. Listening to the real estate agent's comments, Carrie's heart was filled with complicated emotions, so after they left, he immediately had a fierce argument with his wife. Faced with her husband's constant accusations, the exhausted wife eventually chose to ignore him. However, she still respected Carrie's final decision. As several months passed in a hurry, although Carrie had become even smaller, fortunately his daughter prepared a toy house for him, and even carefully altered the clothes from her dolls so he could wear them. Perhaps the companionship of his family made Carrie realize that he had to do something. So before he became even smaller, he decided to do whatever he still could. But unexpectedly, when the family cat suddenly broke into the room, the originally peaceful atmosphere instantly became extremely tense. Although he had once loved this little creature, in the cat's eyes now, he might be nothing more than food, just like a mouse. And that led directly to the scene we saw at the beginning. Very soon, Carrie was knocked down into a storage box in the basement. Fortunately, the plastic bag inside softened the fall and he survived. But the blood-stained clothes left on the ground still made his wife sense that something was terribly wrong. No matter how desperately Carrie shouted, his wife could not hear his tiny voice that was no louder than the buzz of an insect. She even believed that Carrie had already been swallowed by the cat.
Ты это сделал? Не может быть. Зачем ты это сделал?
As his wife left the house, Carrie felt even more hopeless. After shouting for a long time with no result, he sat in the corner and eventually fell asleep from exhaustion. It was not until he woke up at night in shock that he realized he could not simply wait for fate to decide everything. So he used the pieces of cloth inside the box to make a simple coat to keep himself warm. Then he pulled out a copper wire from inside and tied it around his body. After constant searching, he finally found a hole in the corner large enough to support his escape. What Carrie did not realize was that the moment he stepped out of the box, his real adventure had only just begun. Carrie picked up a fallen sewing needle to use as a weapon. Even though this place had already become an isolated island trapping him, he still wanted to be like Robinson Crusoe and overcome every obstacle to return to his family. But no one could have imagined that the basement, which once seemed so small, was now filled with hidden dangers everywhere. Although he could not clearly see what that thing was, Carrie still felt that something was not right, so he quickly climbed toward the nearby water tank. Fortunately, the steps were not too high, and after exhausting all his strength, Carrie finally managed to climb up. After carefully observing for a while, he confirmed that no danger was approaching. So exhausted and thirsty, he quickly climbed down to the bottom of the water tank, and through the droplets falling from the valve, he successfully eased his fatigue. After resting here for one night, Carrie decided to try returning to the upper floor, but when he looked at the staircase leading upward, he felt a deep sense of despair. Trying to call out his daughter's name was completely useless. Having gone an entire day and night without food left Carrie without even a trace of strength to climb. It seemed that crossing those steps was impossible for the time being. Fortunately, after searching around for a while, Carrie successfully found a small piece of chalk that his daughter had used before. Picking up the chalk that now felt as heavy as a stone, Carrie used all his strength to write his name at the entrance of the stairs. Next, he had to find something to eat to fill his stomach. Otherwise, he would starve before his wife and daughter ever came downstairs. Luckily, he remembered that not far away he had once placed a mousetrap, and on it there was a piece of cheese. Thankfully, he had not put poison on it. Otherwise, his hope of survival would have been completely destroyed. Carrie found a nail and prepared to first damage the spring mechanism, but unexpectedly, the weight of the nail was not enough to trigger it. With no other choice, Carrie had to think of another method. After successfully picking up the nail, this time Carrie stood right in front of the trap, and then used all his strength to smash it down. This time, he finally managed to eat some food and recover a bit of strength. But unexpectedly, at that very moment, a spider suddenly descended from above. It had already treated Carrie as its new prey. Sensing the danger, Cherry picked up the sewing needle and swung it repeatedly, until he struck the spider's leg and forced it to retreat. However, this encounter made Cherry realize that tonight might be dangerous, and he had to find a safe place to rest. The box nearby that stored his daughter's toys seemed like a good place. Cherry originally planned to use the nail to force open a hole, but after trying for a long time it still did not work. Fortunately, there is always a solution if you keep thinking, so he found a bottle cap, filled it with water, and used a piece of torn cloth to soak the box. In the end, he successfully tore open a hole large enough to crawl into. Once inside, he used his daughter's eraser to block the opening. Although he still heard faint rustling sounds during the night, he managed to pass the night safely. The next day, Cherry first ate some cheese to ease his hunger, then used one of his daughter's dolls to modify a sweater for himself. At that moment, he seemed to hear the voices of his wife and daughter, so he hurried over and shouted loudly, but even if he shouted until his throat was raw, it was still useless. As the voices gradually faded away, his hope shattered once again. He could only continue waiting, hoping that one day his wife and daughter would come down. However, if he wanted to continue staying here, he first had to deal with the spider that had been watching him from the shadows. This time, Cherry decided to use the fish tank to deal with it, so he picked up the sewing needle and began climbing toward the top of the aquarium. After struggling for quite some time, he finally reached the top, and the spider had already arrived on the opposite side. Just as the confrontation was about to begin, the spider suddenly chose to retreat. Fortunately, Cherry was an excellent swimmer, so falling into the fish tank was not a problem for him. However, the goldfish in front of him was clearly his daughter's favorite pet, yet he could not understand why she had not come downstairs for several days. As the spider quietly withdrew, Cherry successfully climbed back up. Unexpectedly, the moment he came down, he saw that the spider had actually hidden beneath the fish tank. After sensing Cherry's movement, it rushed toward him at once, and so, a battle between man and spider officially began. Although Cherry fought while retreating, he was eventually forced into a corner with nowhere left to escape. When the spider suddenly launched a fierce attack, Cherry instantly found himself facing the danger of losing his life. Fortunately, at the critical moment, he grabbed a piece of wood chip nearby and thrust it directly into the spider's eye. After forcing the spider to retreat once again, Cherry broke down and let out a desperate scream. Several more days passed without him realizing it. Although the spider had not appeared again during that time, the piece of cheese had almost been completely eaten. The good news was that on this day, the basement door opened again, and someone came down. But the bad news was that the person who came down was the same real estate agent who had come earlier to look at the house. It turned out that his wife and daughter had already moved away. The man who came this time had been asked by Cherry's wife to take away their daughter's goldfish. Although the sound of his footsteps shook Cherry's world like thunder, from the fragments of conversation he still learned that his wife and daughter had already left. As the man departed, everything once again returned to silence. Cherry soon discovered that his daughter's goldfish had been taken away, and along with it, his final hope. Just as Cherry was sinking into disappointment, a mosquito suddenly flew close to him. Judging by the size difference between them, Cherry realized that he had become even smaller over the past few days. The toys that used to be the same height as him now looked like towering skyscrapers in his eyes. Realizing that waiting any longer was meaningless, Cherry decided he had to leave this basement. Now the only exit leading to the outside world was the window above that had been left slightly open, but to reach it, he would have to pass through the dreadful spider web. Even though the journey would be extremely dangerous, Cherry did not retreat. Fortunately, his shrinking body also gave him the ability to climb beyond his previous limits. After exhausting every bit of strength he had, Cherry finally climbed to the very top of the storage shelf. After resting for a moment while sitting on an iron pipe, Cherry noticed that there was still a small gap between the pipe and the wall. If he failed to jump across it, what awaited him would be a deadly fall. Even so, Cherry no longer had any way back. He He stepped back to gain some distance, took a deep breath, and then rushed forward without hesitation. After successfully reaching the crack in the stone wall, Carrie did not stop and continued moving toward the window. After traveling for quite some time, he finally arrived in the territory of the spider that had been watching him for days. Carrie did not dare relax for even a second, carefully stepping over one strand of web after another, but unexpectedly, a faint sound still alerted the creature. The opponent that had once been evenly matched with him had now become a towering giant. Carrie knew that he was almost certain to meet his end. However, just as he was preparing to face death, a mosquito suddenly flew straight into the center of the web. The violent vibrations instantly drew the spider's attention away. While the creature returned toward the trapped mosquito, Carrie dragged his trembling legs and slowly slipped away. After enduring countless hardships, he finally reached the window. Looking at the outside world that was so close, Carrie tried to crawl through, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not succeed. After an entire day of struggle, he had completely run out of ideas, and eventually lay down on the ground and drifted into a deep sleep without realizing it, until the next day, when an ant suddenly startled him awake. Fortunately, his body had shrunk again, allowing Carrie to escape danger, while the spider was blocked inside by the metal mesh. Looking at the creature he had battled for so many days, Carrie felt a complicated mix of emotions. As the sun slowly set, the house that had once been filled with laughter now felt cold and empty. Clearly, Carrie's wife and daughter had already moved far away, when a white butterfly suddenly fluttered in front of him. Carrie, who had survived so many life and death moments, finally realized that even if he managed to escape this place, he would never reunite with his family again. At that moment, he could only turn his longing for his family into the spiritual strength that allowed him to keep living. As Carrie finally let go of his struggle, the film also comes to its end. Although the movie appears to be science fiction on the surface, at its heart it is actually a deeply human story. The core question it explores may be how we understand the meaning of existence, and what the true nature of love really is. At the beginning, Carrie was obsessed with returning to his normal body, because he believed that only by regaining his original identity and staying with his family could life have meaning. But in the end, he discovered that the more he fought against reality, the more painful everything became. Only after surviving the life and death struggles in the basement did he slowly understand that the meaning of existence does not lie in perfection or control. Even if his body becomes tiny, even if his family can no longer see him, even if fate feels absurd and unreasonable, as long as he calmly accepts everything, refuses to abandon his love for his family, and truly lives in the present moment, life still holds meaning. Just like when Carrie finally became part of nature, although he did not find traditional salvation, he discovered the true essence of existence. In simple terms, even if fate is not in your control, the way you choose to face life will always be your own decision. Life itself contains many things that simply have no clear reason, so there is no need to endlessly ask why it had to be you, and no need to force yourself to become a certain kind of person. Accept your circumstances, protect the warmth inside your heart, and even if you are small, you can still live out your own value. That is the meaning of existence. As for the true nature of love, although Carrie could never reunite with his family or be seen again, he finally understood that love does not require being together every single day or sharing physical presence. Even if he eventually disappears completely from this world, the care and protection he feels for his daughter will continue to stay with her forever. And that concludes today's story. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.